Good times, great music at 2 and you are FM 103.7. We're having a look at the world of politics today. I know it's not a Tuesday, but we're doing it today anyway with our Professor of Politics out of the University of Newcastle, Dr. Jim Jose, who has decided to go all red, white and blue on us today. Mate, you're heading across to the US. And of course, one of the biggest stories in international politics is what is happening with former President over there, Donald J. Trump. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Mark. Yes, it's I guess something that we need to be paying attention to some extent, not simply because of the spectacle that this involves, but conceivably Donald Trump could be re-elected as president. I should put that the other way around. He could be elected again as president of the US. And that, from my perspective, and looking at it from an international perspective, can be a little worrying, given and he tore up a lot of international agreements in his last term of office, which we're living with the consequences now, a much more destabilised international order than we had, say, pre-2016.
And obviously, no big disclaimer here, because this is not exactly a breaking news story, but I obviously personally hold the complete opposite view to you there. So we could probably talk about the good, the bad, the ugly of that all day. But when we look at where we're at with the latest roll of indictments, which they're moving forward with the boxes and all of that, how have we led to this point? Because there's a counter argument to it, but we'll let you have a go here.
Yeah, look, I mean, there is a narrative out there that this is all a conspiracy against Donald Trump, and it's just simply the Democrats getting even sort of thing, and concocting charges that don't exist and so forth. Now, there's variations on a theme here, and there's probably some elements in which some elements of it that are grounded in truth, but against that, we do know that Donald Trump was quite vocal around January the 6th about encouraging supporters to take matters into their own hands and demonstrate. His position is that he only asked them to peacefully demonstrate when what happened was a quite violent outbreak. The issue about hush money to keep a particular woman silent about what happened between her and Donald Trump, that's a matter of some debate, I guess, from the Trump camp. But there's sufficient evidence to suggest that something not quite right went on. Then there's the civil suit that he settled without it going to court, because if it went to court, there might be an actual legal finding that could have jeopardised his capacity to maintain the current narrative he has. But I think we need to sort of take a sort of step back from some of those, Mark, and think about what would it mean to have somebody who was a convicted felon elected President of the United States?
Well, that would be a very interesting point, and we'll sort of play a little bit of fantasy booking here with what could play out if that happens. But I think that the reverse narrative of some of this stuff is, if we look at what's happened now with the President has taken home a whole lot of boxes, and I think partly where he may have went wrong here is supposedly not just give everything back in a hurry, but the counter argument to this is, well, the rule of law is not necessarily being applied fairly. I mean, we know that the current president's got a heap of stuff in the garage next to the Corvette, so he's got boxes. There's the email server that Hillary Clinton, although she never became president, but with whatever was on that, I mean, that was clearly not cool either. So there does seem the argument could be played as well, if the justice system there has been weaponised against one particular candidate versus a whole lot of other folks that don't see, there's nothing to see here either.
Well, we don't know exactly what happened in the case of the Democrats at present, because there wasn't perhaps sufficient evidence for a case to be mounted, and a case against a sitting president is not likely to happen regardless of what political party they happen to be attached to. The Hillary Clinton one is a bit more complicated, because that involves somebody hacking into their server and making that material available, whether that was at her request or whether it was done from some other angle.
Yeah. Still not supposed to have one, though.
No. But the point, I guess, that we sort of think about is that there's no barrier in the US Constitution to somebody who's in jail standing for election as president, as happened in the case, for example, of Eugene Debs back in I think it was around 1916. He was put in jail under the Espionage Act because he made an anti-war speech. This is the land of the free where free speech is sacred. He gave a speech which was outlawed because it was advocating against the US going into war, and the US weren't at war at that time. Anyway, that's digressing, Mark. He was in jail and he ran as a presidential candidate for the Socialist Party. I think he managed 3% of the vote. He was never any threat to Woodrow Wilson and the Republican candidate.
Having said that, though, I mean, while he may have very well run that campaign from jail, we didn't have television, we didn't have social media, we didn't have the ways to access people's lives like we do, fast forward 110 or so years. So, again, I know it's a bit of fantasy booking here, but what could that possibly look like? Could that actually galvanise a lot more people to go, yeah, we're on board with this, or would it just become the spectacle the latest round of spectacle that is US politics? Because they do things a bit different over there.
Well, certainly, and it's an interesting hypothetical because most jails and prisons have some restrictions on the use of mobile phones and various forms of technology. Whether that
wouldn't be a regulation prisoner, though.
Whether that would then preclude Donald Trump from being in prison and using that technology to mount a campaign is a curious question. Whether that will be waived, and this will be a special circumstance or whatever, whether the rules will be changed to suit him, because I guess you'll probably disagree with this, Mark, but Donald Trump doesn't agree with rules. He doesn't abide by rules. He just breaks them whenever he sees fit.
We'll just live to disagree, Jim.
Yeah, and then tries to say, I'm being picked on because you're pulling me up and saying, hey, hang on a second, you need to be accountable for doing X.
Yeah, I just come back to the other point, though, that the rule of law would appear to many not to be applied evenly, and we're not spreading that peanut butter equally across all sides of the slice of bread.
I'm sure, Mark, that there are numerous examples that we can point to about that. The ladder of law is supposed to have no top and no bottom and supposed to be evenly balanced, but we do know that those with power and connections are able to, shall we say, tilt the scales one way or another. Now, when you have multiple people with power tilting the scales, and it's going to go one way for a time, then it's going to bounce back another way. So at the moment, Donald Trump is somebody who claims that he's always being silenced, but he never has any trouble getting his voice heard, getting his message out. There's been no serious, shall we say, suppression of Donald Trump's capacity to speak.
Now, not so much, because I know that the landscape has changed a little bit, but I mean, and on this we'll probably run out of time, Jim, but if we circle back to the January 6th thing, which is the one, I would probably suggest if they can want to nail him on anything, that would be the one. When the protests, the marches, whatever, when that became a little bit out of hand, he put some messages up on social media straight away saying, look, go home. This is not what we're all about. Go home, go home. And they were deleted by all of the social media platforms. So, I mean, to say, well, he just did nothing, he just was encouraging it, I mean, so...
Well, some would argue that putting that stuff up was too little too late and somewhat disingenuous. But
a lot of people have, a lot of the organisations have marches, though, no, regardless, even if it's the most weird out there thing that you're marching for, whoever organises that cannot be responsible for the actions of every single person.
No,
that's not possible.
No, and that
or even an element.
I think to some extent that's understood, but given Donald Trump's capacity to mobilise people and for people to take him literally and not question anything he says, that's a different kettle of fish. I guess as we're about to run out of time, I'd sort of pose this question: that what will this mean for Australia and the capacity of Australian prime ministers, or at least the Australian government, to make decisions or operate as a sovereign nation, given our close alliance with the US and with someone like Donald Trump as president, may be taking decisions that are not in Australia's best interest? What capacity will we have to be able to say, no, we're not going down that path when we're already locked into it. So for Australia, the prospect of a Trump administration could be far more challenging, to put it at its most neutral, or at a more alarming form of statement, Mark. It could lock us into things that we would choose not to be part of because they are not rational or appropriate or in Australia's best interests.
They also come, well, firstly, you say apples, I say ice cream. So we're not going to get that one. We'd spend all day on that and we'll just shake hands and go home. But I think that comes back to a larger point, which we'll probably cover again on a different day, is that we are tied to a US alliance, irrespective really of whoever is in that office. So they are questions that Australia may, at some point, may revisit down the road. Who knows?
Well, exactly, and I guess the point that sort of worries me is that the US often makes decisions without reference to or consultation with their supposed allies, and suddenly there's a decision taken and those in the alliance are suddenly faced with, hang on a second, is this where we need to be going? Is this in the country's best interest? Is this what the population, our voters, want us to do? I would probably say Australian governments would tend to go along with whatever the giant power has to say, and then try and adapt to it. But I think we need to be mindful of the fact that we now live in a different age, and it's probably time to, I guess, to think about, well, if there's a Trump administration, life will get that much more difficult for the Australian government, given especially the political dissimilarity between the current Australian government and a possible Trump administration.
Well, I mean, regardless of the last government, and you'll disagree on this, the last government plus the one we've got have moved very much to the left, where he would be moving in a different direction. Again, I say apples, you say ice cream, Jim. We've run out of time, but grab your popcorn, mate. It'll be an interesting one over the next couple of weeks. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, my pleasure, Mark. Thanks very much.
All right, our Professor of Politics, Dr. Jim Jose, on 2NURFM.
A broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.